friend, and welcome to our Tea Time. Today's Tea Time topic is crybaby. Now, I bring this topic up because, I'll just be very frank and honest, I have found myself to be crying a lot lately, which for me is extremely unusual. And it got me to thinking about this process of crying. It's funny, but when we're young, we've all heard it before. If you let your emotions out, if you let yourself cry, you get called a crybaby. As if crying itself is something that is only a part of our youth and is not a part of our adulthood whatsoever. And we've built this culture, at least in America, where we see crying as weak. We see crying as vulnerable. We see crying as a person who can't, quote, quote, control their emotions. You know, I see a lot of times on TV, all these reality shows, it's kind of funny, and I've noticed that a lot of girls will not cry on camera, and their excuse will be, I don't want to, mess up my makeup, so I'm not going to cry. And, usually women have been the part of the species that's more willing to cry. What I've begun to realize is I think part of our problem as a culture is that we are not crying enough. In fact, I think crying is just like laughter. There's a healing element to it. And I myself have witnessed it as I've gone through kind of a harder period in the last couple of weeks. I've done a lot of crying. Now, usually I can't get myself to cry. And I've realized that's because I'm so far away from the wound. I'm so detached from my emotions. I'm so out of touch with how I really feel about it. Getting to the point where I can cry and let it out took a lot of self-compassion and attention to my feelings to even get there. But just like when I was a kid, I remember getting spanked and stuff, which is, twisted in its own right, but it does force you to cry. And when you have pain in your life and you cry, you always feel better, right? You may feel sore, your chest may hurt, you may feel worn out, but we feel better. I believe that it is time for us to let our cries out. I believe it's time for us to be compassionate to ourselves. And really, even though it helps to have someone saying, oh, they're there, poor dear, or rub your back. I mean, a lot of us want that sort of attention when we're feeling that sort of sadness. Really, what's needing to happen is to get that emotion out of us, to keep it from being bottled up inside of us. And I have a theory. I have a theory about breast cancer and prostate cancer. And this comes from looking at clients' charts and knowing people's intimate stories of what they've been diagnosed with and seeing their charts and seeing their issues. And time again, I have found that the people who seem to be getting these diseases, these two cancers of the breast or of the prostate, are people who always held in their own emotions. They're people who never let themselves cry, never let that emotion out, never gave their emotions any space. And perhaps it's because they didn't want to seem like a crybaby, and perhaps it's because that's the way they were taught. But I believe what eventually happens is, whether it's breast for the female or prostate for the man, this part of our life is probably associated with emotion, and it was bottled up so long, the cells went crazy. Literally is what cancer is, when the cells go crazy from it. Now, I'm not blaming any person for ever any kind of disease that they have, but I do think that there is a healthier way to life than we have been allowing ourselves to be in, quote, modern society. I think our desire to pretend to be strong and to swallow our tears and to not have a place where we can cry and get it out, I think this is a big source of our personal dis-ease. Now, you may ask, well, how do I cry if I can't cry? The truth is, you have to basically be in this state with yourself where you say, poor baby, where you take compassion for yourself and what it is you've gone through, and really just look at yourself wholly and sweetly and be compassionate. Poor baby, for what you've gone through, poor thing. And as soon as you surrender that ego, because I think it's the ego that's what's holding back the tears and holding back the emotion, as soon as you truly are compassionate to yourself, and basically almost act like an angel to yourself, if you want to role play here. Once you cradle yourself in your own arms of being an angel to yourself, this is the pathway for the emotion to come up. Now, I will say this. I think this is all part of my grand transformation, and what I've realized is that I learned a long time ago to stifle my emotions, and I did it usually to put other people's feelings first. I would nurture people and help people, and I would get a lot of emotional satisfaction from helping and nurturing people, but my own personal emotional needs were not attended to, really, for years and years. I think this is all part of where I'm finally growing. And what ended up happening, just to share a little bit of my story, is I ended up going through tremendous anxiety as a result of repressing my emotions. That's what it turned into. I had incredible anxiety, and those anxieties got worse and worse and worse until finally I usually manifested some sort of disease like pneumonia. I had MRSA, staph infection. Like, basically my immune system broke down and completely collapsed. And then once I was sick, all this emotion came out. Yes, I cried in the hospital. Yes, I cried because I had this big enough excuse in my life to take a moment to feel sorry for myself. Now that I've begun to sort of awaken, if you will, and come into my senses, I have spent the last year or so really paying attention to my feelings and really just allowing myself to feel whatever it is I was feeling. And that's what it took for quite a while, was just acknowledging how I feel about this or acknowledging how I feel about that. And I don't have a solution for it, but this is how I feel. And that alone was the beginning of the reversal. After probably 2 or 3 years of knowing how I feel but not knowing what to do about it, like, I would say it finally kind of, my emotions built up, and I was so aware of how unhappy I was feeling that finally whatever was trying to be strong inside finally got on its knees and let the emotion out. And I was able to let the emotion out without being sick, without manifesting a tragedy, without having anything. And that was a little confusing on its own, by the way, to be a crybaby and have no reason or anything to be crying at, right? But what I realized in the whole experience is that I believe it's a healthy process for us to let these feelings out. In fact, one light walker I once knew told me something which I've stuck with me to this day. She said that it was her ancient understanding that the actual emotional memories of trauma and pain are stored in water in the body. And I myself have always thought that too. I think our emotional memory is stored in the water in our body. Most of our body is water. People who are water signs usually do better by the water. And her point was that when we cry, those tiny tears are the actual biological floppy disks of the trauma. So from her perspective, getting the crying out was very, very good. One last thing I'll say is there are some people who cry, and never stop crying. And I'm not quite sure, I can't get into their skin, but I have the intention that when you can't stop crying and it's not doing you any good, you've lost what the intention of the crying was. The intention of the crying is to feel better. So if you find you're a person who can't stop crying, well, then maybe you may certainly be a crybaby. You may certainly let it out. But of course, it is to feel better. Or I like to say good or gooder. All right, friends. Well, in this very heavy times of Virgo, you have my full invitation to be a crybaby. Be a crybaby as much as you need. You'll find it makes you feel much better and allows you to release the past. I'll be back in 24 hours with your Friday Live at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Until then, remember I love you, and to live, love, be.